Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Andy Birch of Derby, and our topic is farming. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott.
That's a pretty wide topic, farming, but you're a dairy farmer.
I am a dairy farmer. My parents were actually first-generation dairy farmers. They bought their farm in Derby in 1988 from the Robillard family.
Right.
And they ran it for 17 years until they sold their cows shortly after I started college. And I went through VTC, UVM, and worked off the farm for other people for about 5 years. And then my wife and I decided it was time to come home, and we bought a herd of cows and took the plunge in 2014.
Right. You know what? We forgot something, and she just reminded us. We never introduced your sidekick.
Yes, this is Hannah. She's just over a year old now.
And she
Our
is
little
a
farm
spitting
baby.
image. There's no doubt that's your kid. The first thing I saw of her, I said, that's your daughter.
Yep. We love her. She keeps us on our toes, makes a lot more work for us and a lot more complexity running the farm, but we wouldn't do it any other way.
She doesn't have chores yet on the farm.
Not yet. She helps best by sleeping through morning milking.
No. Does she have any favorite animals yet?
Cows and chickens. She likes to talk to the cows and talk to the chickens, and she's still a little scared of the cows, I think. She likes to go up and see them, but she likes to watch us pet them.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the first time you went to school with my boys, I believe.
Yes, I was a year
Curtis and
behind
Nicholas,
them.
right? And but the first time I really met you was you were when I was in the State House, and you came to our committee to testify on something. I don't really recall what.
I actually don't remember for sure what I was testifying about. I know the end of high school I was the young agricultural ambassador for the state, and I think maybe they had me just down there to shadow Bobby Starr for the day.
Oh, could be.
Yeah.
I know I ran into somebody. I don't know if it was around. I don't think it was around here. It was one of your partners at VTC, and they asked if I knew you, and then I asked, well, did you come to the State House? He says, no. He said that was for really smart people like you, and he raved about how smart you were.
Well, I don't know about that. How many times have you heard the State House described as smart? But.
Well, that's true. I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
What did your parents think about you wanting to pursue? After they'd gotten out of farming, what did they think? What did they think about you wanting to take that journey?
I think my parents had mixed feelings about it. For one, this is what I have always wanted to do, and they recognize that, and they support me in that. And they, having done it themselves, they understand some of the challenges we face, but they're happy to have us back home and have Hannah nearby to entertain. So they're glad to see cows again. They're glad that the farm is up and running, but at the same time, they know that it's not an easy row to hoe.
Right. Now, at one point, as you've heard and people have told you, and I think you were telling me beforehand from some of my write-ins, we had a lot of farms here at one point. And a lot of them went out, 50s, 60s, but then it's been a steady decline. So we could sit here and talk about all the difficulties of being a farmer, but right now, isn't there a renaissance? Isn't some of the land starting to come back to use? Because I'm seeing more small scale farm, and then you're seeing alpacas popping up or llamas. When your parents got out of farming, it was a pretty bleak time. It was a tough time for farmers, but is it getting better? In some ways, at least.
I think in some ways it is. There are people who are learning to be a little more inventive with farming, to find other opportunities that maybe weren't there 20 years ago. And that said, there certainly are still opportunities within conventional dairying. I mean, that's exactly what I do, and the same year that I started out, we saw other farms that came back online that had been empty before. To some extent, I think it takes new people with new energy and a new business plan, honestly. I'd say today there still aren't enough young people coming along to take the places of all of those who are retiring, but that just means that that agriculture is going to continue to evolve, and we'll start to see more and different operations.
And you don't pretend to be like in competition. Like you're not trying to drive Doug Nelson out of business, who has mega farms. You have to operate your business different.
Yes, exactly. And it's really interesting looking at Yankee Farm Credit puts together a summary of a lot of their clients throughout the Northeast every year, and often the smallest and the largest farms do best, and sometimes those ones that are kind of in the middle have the most struggle. They need to have all of the machinery and assets that you need to be big, but they don't really have the size to have those economies of scale. So even though we're neighbors with Doug Nelson and neighbors with Keith Gray, we don't pretend to really be competing with them. We wouldn't wish them out of business, and I know they feel the same way about us. As long as we can be good to each other, and that goes for all of our neighbors, I think we all are happy to see each other thrive and succeed.
Now, are you old? And you're probably not even old enough to remember the days. Now I'm starting to sound old. Back in my day, but no, I remember, traveling around the kingdom, having to stop for the cows crossing the road. Now, you probably don't even hardly remember that, do you?
Not personally. I've never had to stop my car for cows crossing, or very seldomly. We cross heifers a few times a year,
Right.
and that can be a challenge. You get impatient people once in a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sometimes they're there to take pictures, and sometimes they just want to go through as quickly as possible.
I know the last time it's kind of sad that I can now just think of the last time that I saw cows crossing. It was outside of Albany, and somebody told me that herd is mostly gone now too, but I quickly grabbed my camera because back when I was growing up, stopping, cattle crosses, that was a common thing. It was kind of like stopping in Newport, we used to have to stop all the time for trains going through. Trains are gone, cows are gone, and but no, I love seeing them crossing the road. But you tell me, not everybody loves to see them so much.
No, some people are always in a hurry to get someplace. If you're running 5 or 10 minutes late to begin with, and suddenly you have to stop for cows, they don't always take it well. But
Oh, suck it up.
exactly.
Suck it up.
We're just trying to do our jobs too.
Yeah. But don't you have I've talked to a couple farmers though, especially during the tough times. They said every once in a while, when they see people taking photos of them working, they said every once in a while that it actually bothers them because it's like, do you know how hard our work is, and you're just taking a picture? But I wouldn't feel that way personally if I were a farmer, I don't think. Do you mind people taking photos?
No, not at all. We're happy to share what we do with people. I think it helps build understanding, if nothing else. Whenever we do have heifers or cows across the road, we always see more cars driving by slowly, and the dandelion run goes right by our farm every year, and we try to have them outside for that because the runners seem to like having them there. Sometimes the heifers run along with the runners.
Well, the funny thing is, we take cows for granted just because, even though there aren't as many cows here in the kingdom now, they're here. But if you're from the city, you don't have that much exposure to farm animals, and I'm sure you see a lot of out-of-state plates just taking pictures of your cows. Well, it's kind of like when we go to Florida. I remember when we first started going to Florida, we'd take photos of what the locals sometimes refer to as ocean rats, or flying rats, or whatever, is pelicans. And to us, like, pelicans are these really cool creatures. To them, it's like, not so cool. So, have you had any moments where you said, "What did I get myself into?"
Whenever something goes wrong, I guess. Well, for instance, this morning on the way here, we were trying to get things finished up so I could be here on time, and the cows were going up the hill to their pasture, and I looked, and there was a heifer standing out in a field where she wasn't supposed to be, so we had to go wade through hip-high grass to try and get her back where she belonged, and it wasn't that big a deal, but still set us back 15 minutes. But then once in a while we have a major breakdown and we're out trying to fix something at 11 o'clock at night, or the cows are waiting for their feed and we can't get it to them on time. And
like, I know
that
one
can be
night I
really
read
frustrating.
I know on your Facebook one night you were musing about whether you turned the fence on. Something like that, 'cause you were thinking, should I go down to the barn?
That will keep you awake at night. Did I do that? It's kind of like when someone drives away from their house. Did I leave the oven on? But in my case, I live a mile away from the farm because my parents are still in the farmhouse, and it's a bit of a drive to get back there. Fortunately, I did turn on the fencer, and even if I hadn't, they probably wouldn't have bothered the fence overnight, but still, it's a little unsettling when you realize, well, that gate might be open, or the fence might be on, or, yeah.
Because I know I live up on Pine Hill Road in Derby, and one night we got a phone call from a state police dispatcher. They just knew who I was. They said, "Scott, do you know who owns the cows?" They're up in Coventry portion, way up past me, but they just figured. They said they're all over the road, and we're trying to get them out. And I guess they didn't, the officers, as much as they tried, they didn't really know what they were doing, and so they didn't quite know who owned the cows, and they were trying to herd them, and I couldn't help them. But so I guess they want to go. I guess cows want to go where they want to go, and they'll do that.
They certainly respect people who understand them better too. Just knowing how they move and how they want to naturally go and what sorts of obstacles might distract them. It takes a certain amount of experience, I guess, to really understand herding cows, and quite frankly, once they bust out like that, and if they're on a public road, they might already have they might already be a little spooked and irrational. So that's always difficult to deal with.
As we record this show, I think the weather's going to be vastly different by the time this airs, because I understand the weather is going to be improving dramatically. But as we air this show, have you thought about buying an ark, like a Noah's Ark? Because we've had a lot of rain. How has that affected your farming this spring?
It's been really tough. This time of year, we would normally be all done with first cut, and we're not even quite halfway through because we just haven't had the weather for it. And we see a lot of farms, ourselves included, taking chances that we normally wouldn't. We didn't mow this last week, but a lot of people did try to cut hay, and a lot of hay got rained on, hundreds of acres, which definitely hurts the quality. I was actually talking to a friend who farms down in Addison last night, and they're normally well ahead of us, and they're actually behind right now. They haven't started any haying. They haven't put a single corn seed in the ground, and this time in June, that's terrible for them. They have those heavy clay soils, and it's this rain, they just can't deal with it.
I've always heard that if you're going to plant corn up here, that it's supposed to be knee height come July 4th. I don't know how much truth there is in that, but...
There's a lot of truth in that, and it doesn't always happen. I've had years where mine didn't grow fast enough because it was cold and wet, and then at the end of the year you're sweating, hoping it dries down in time to harvest before the frost comes. It's an expensive crop to grow, and when it works well, but it's a lot of money to invest in a failure.
I know a lot of home gardeners are reporting this year all their seeds have rotted, and they're having to replant their gardens again because it's so wet. But you really are weather dependent, because I've interviewed a lot of old farmers over the years for my history work, and it was so funny. Gary Sadowski on WCAX is everybody seems to love him, but I'm going to tell you when he first came, because he's weatherman slash entertainer. Some of the old farmers who even didn't farm anymore, they couldn't stand his style because to them, weather was not something to laugh about. It was cut and dry because their lives as farmers, just revolved around the weather. So it took them a lot of time to get used to Gary and his humorous way of presenting the weather. Then I don't know if you remember Stuart Hall. He was the weatherman for all my growing up. He only died recently, but he was dry. He was straight to the point, and that was the weather. They loved that, but
we care about accurate more than anything. There can be nothing more frustrating than watching the weather forecast change after you've made a weather-dependent decision. Hay mows and then hay's mowed and then it rains, or you decide we're not going to work in the fields because rain's coming, and then you get a bright sunny day. But weather forecasts have gotten better, so maybe the entertainment's a little more warranted now. But when they screw up big time, and I'm sure they have a very difficult job, but yeah,
but you're a young guy. You must be computer savvy. Do you even track the weather online?
Constantly. I have it right on my phone, and I often check it several times a day during the summer.
Right. Now, so what kind of you hay?
Yes.
So are you into round bales, square bales, or?
I do mostly round bales. So we normally need about 48 hours of dry weather for that. It just needs to wilt enough that we aren't going to bale up too much moisture. With the wrapped round bales, it ferments, so it doesn't need to be totally dry like the square bales do.
Right. I've never farmed, but I've written so much about farming. Like, I learned so much about the whole food, the silage and food storage from when the Robillard Flats barn burned. I went into depth on that, and like that round barn made total sense at the time that it was built. But the evolution of farming, do you store hay inside now at all?
I do a little bit. We still make some square bales, and those are stored inside, but right. I have 5,000 square feet of indoor hay storage, 20 feet high, and we don't use very much of it. Probably not more than 900 square feet at the most.
Right.
Yeah.
And I see some farmers, because I can ask them incredibly stupid things because I'm not a farmer, but they don't all wrap them in plastic though, do they? All the bales aren't wrapped in plastic?
No, that depends on how dry they are. If they still have some moisture content, then they're wrapped, and that allows them to ferment. It blocks out the oxygen. If they're dried down enough, around 90% dry matter, then they're dry enough that they can just be stored under cover and they won't heat, okay. They won't degrade.
So we have about 10 minutes left here. How is farming doing right now? Are you going to be able to make a go of it?
I think we can make a go of it if we've survived this long. When we started out in 2014 was one of the best years ever for farmers, so it was a great time for us to start. We had all of our startup struggles and the extra expenses with that, but the higher milk price kind of helped us float along. And then 2015 and 2016 were awful years, and 2017 hasn't been great so far, but we've been able to pay our bills and keep ahead, and even though we haven't made a lot of money, I think we'll be okay.
Right.
especially with things turning around right now.
How many head of cattle are you up to?
I'm milking 49 right now, and we have about 100 cattle total with dry cows and young stock.
You know, just think, you know, back, it would be even, well, I know your grandparents, you said, weren't farmers, but the days of hand milking, because, like, you know, 25 cows was a pretty good herd back in the hand milking days. So things have changed. Like, you know, they used to pick it up every day with just when they were in just cans, and you said they pick up every other day now?
Right. Depending on what the farm has for storage space. My farm, we're able to go every other day, and that's the longest that we're allowed by law for grade A certification. But some farms don't have the storage capacity, and they'll be picked up every day and pay extra for that. But our milk quality certainly is a lot better than when it was in cans, and I think we make a better product now than we ever have in the past.
Right. So what are your plans for the future on the farm?
So our plans for the future, we are still working toward buying the property from my parents. Derby land prices are high enough right now that we can't swing that yet, but we also really do want to build a new barn eventually. We're in one of the oldest operating dairy barns in the state, and even though it works well for us and it was a great way to start out, it really is a labor killer, and if we want to be in decent shape in a few decades and have more of a family life, we're going to need some sort of newer facility.
So why do you like farming so much? What really, because it has to be, you know, it's more than just, I can think of far easier ways to make money than farming, and because as your classmate basically said, you were a genius, so you could go out and do anything. We joked beforehand that the producer of this show, he's made a killing by being a singer-songwriter, so maybe that's the business we ought to be going into. But no, in all seriousness, you could make money far easier by working somewhere else.
And
Why?
I think you'd find that to be true of a lot of self-employed people, probably yourself included.
No doubt.
Yeah. I really do enjoy being my own boss. My wife and I both took pay cuts for sure coming back and farming, but we enjoy working together. We enjoy being able to spend all the time we want with our daughter, and I've always loved working around cows and being able to run my own business and hopefully control my own destiny. I really did love the job I had before when I was working for a larger farm down in Addison. They were great people to work for and work with, but this got me home. I can see my parents as they get older, and see our other family members, and be here where I grew up.
Yeah, that really is, because there's the struggles of being self-employed, but then there's because every once in a while I even ask myself, like, what am I doing? I've been doing it now for 15 years, but in reality I wouldn't have it any other way. I just kind of wish the whole insurance thing would, because I don't know about you, but you know, we struggle with the my wife remains employed full-time outside of our business for, you know, in part because of the health insurance, and health insurance is a challenge for anybody who is self-employed. So.
Absolutely. We've been very frustrated with Vermont Health Connect and trying to navigate that. We finally have things pretty well figured out, I think.
For this month.
Yeah, for this month.
Yeah, for this month.
I know the first year we were signed up, we were getting letters monthly that we hadn't paid, and we're getting shut off, even though we've always paid on time. And fortunately, things seem to have improved, but I'm curious to see what the Scott administration does to change things, and honestly, I'm curious to see what comes out of Washington.
Right. Yeah, because that's the other part. I think farming more so than me, but you must keep your eye on politics, because, you know, even though you want to focus on the cows, it seems like politics and farming seems to go hand in hand to a degree because, whether it's trade with other countries, whether it's imports, do you keep an eye on all that?
Yes, yes. We have to keep an eye on Montpelier and on Washington. And changing regulations change every aspect of our business. We have to watch the regulations for sanitation, for milk. We're inspected 4 times a year, twice by the state and twice by the cooperative. Now we have the required agricultural practices and certified small farm. We have to be a certified small farm for environmental standards, and we have to watch what happens with trade policy and with agricultural policy at the federal level too. None of it's insurmountable, but when it changes abruptly, it can have a really profound effect on our business.
Are you organic? Are you a certified organic farm, or?
No, I'm not certified organic. We're members of Cabot Creamery Cooperative. So when they do well, we do well.
Right.
And they've been a great co-op to work with. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Right. Yeah, 'cause at one point, as you know, from reading an article that I did on one of your former hired men,
Dean Palin, great guy.
Dean Palin, who's in his 90s, his family founded Elmwood Dairy, and at one point there was just about every community had a dairy in it, and that's not the case anymore. You don't really have much of an option now, do you, about where you ship your milk to?
No, there are a few options for conventional farmers. We're members of Cabot. Some are members of Dairy Farmers of America or St. Albans Co-op, and there are a few options for organic producers as well that are good for them. But we don't have a lot of local dairies that we can market directly to. And really, it's gotten to the point that the differences between the co-ops, you're paid mostly the same regardless of where you send your milk. The biggest difference being organic versus conventional.
Talk about your old hired man there, or was that your parents' hired man?
My parents
Dean
hired man.
Palin. I think you ought to have yourself one of those epic mustaches that he has. He has a mustache like no other. So.
Yeah. Oh. That guy is something else. He still comes to the farm. When he came home from Florida, we were one of his first stops. He just showed up at the barn to inspect the place. But,
yeah. So he brings a lot of history with him too. He has a lot of institutional knowledge about farming, and I bet you're a young guy who actually listens to people like him. Because farming has changed since he was a young man, but just that knowledge helps you out probably to know where farming has come from, and you have a vision of where it's going.
Yeah, I've been listening to Dean since I was Hannah's age. Yeah, he's an entertaining character, but it's great listening to those old timers too, hearing what they've been doing. Sometimes we'll hear a new idea and they'll talk about why it didn't work 30 years ago when someone else tried it. Their knowledge, sometimes it's easy to discount, but we really need to listen to them.
Now, and you are now a crusty old veteran of the farming world. You grew up in farming. Do you have younger people, or maybe not even younger people, who are entering the farming world come to you and pick your brain yet?
Not often. We did actually have a neighboring farm that restarted about 2 years after we did, and they came and talked to us a little bit about how our business plan was structured and wanting some insight on how they should set up their place. They're about 4 years younger than I am, so that's about the closest I can say we've come to that.
Do farmers help out each other? As in, like for example, I know in crises they do, because like when I did that article on the Robillard farm, Nelson's, I think it was Doug and Richard happened to be at their mega farm right across the field, and they came dashing over with their cattle carrier and threw in the calves. But do farmers help each other out?
as much as we can.
Right.
Yeah, we have our neighbors. We know who they are. And, a big guy like Nelson doesn't often need our help, but certainly some of the smaller ones, we try to help each other along, because if we don't help them when they're in crisis, we could end up in the same situation a month later, and we certainly need the extra hands once in a while to save ourselves from disaster.
That seems to go way back in farming, because I've interviewed, as I said, a lot of old farmers, and they always talked about, in a time of need, they helped each other out when, if somebody's barn burnt down, they would house some of the cattle or whatever. And fortunately, we don't see, well, maybe it's because there aren't as many farms, and so we don't see as many barn fires like there used to be. But come to think about it, it's because there's only a fraction of the number of working farms. In closing, I do have to say, every time I pass an old crumbling barn, I often think of the memories that were created in it. And if that farmer could be alive today, the generations of farmers who farmed that land and farmed that barn, if they could see it today, I just wonder what they would think. It's like I grew up, I live in what used to be the Buck farm, and Bill Buck. And I've heard a lot of stories about him. He was a real worker. He had a big barn in back of our house. And so if something goes wrong, or the door opens up, or if the door opens up, I'll say, well, here comes Bill in from chores. So he still lives on in our house, at least in my imagination. So
That's something we definitely see in our old barn too, and there's a place inside where someone painted 1939 by TG, and there are other places where we see initials carved into the walls, but I wish that it was cheaper to maintain those old structures. I mentioned we really need to build a new barn, and it's either spend $250,000 fixing an old barn that will never be as good as a new one, or spend $250,000 building a new one.
Right, that's it.
Yeah. It's really tough. We don't want to lose that piece of our history, but we also need to make decisions that'll help us be successful in the future.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show, and you have one perfect daughter.
I think so.
She acted up less than some of the people I've interviewed, and no, she didn't. She was happy with her bottle, and it won't be long before she'll be helping you out in the barn.
We look forward to it.
Okay, thanks for coming on, and thank you, Hannah, for coming on too. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.